Today, we're going to do an episode on the possibility of relapse. That seems to be a big concern from some of our listeners.
And what you can do to help prevent it.
Or not. So we have a lot to talk about with that. Stay tuned.
Real life for real families. Hurts, habits, and hang-ups happen in every family.
Jerry and I are here with tools to help you trust God, clean house, and tell the truth to ramp up the joy in your family.
You have what it takes.
It's time to become sober on purpose
For his purpose.
Jerry and I have really had a good time running the Sober on Purpose Facebook group. Something keeps coming up over and over again of, if a person gets sober, what should the other person be doing? Often they feel really anxious and worried about if the sobriety is going to last. And we're going to spend this podcast trying to make suggestions, experience, strength, and hope around that.
Yeah, I can remember early on when I went sober and we were trying to work through our issues. You at one point even said to me, I need you to be able to guarantee me or assure me or something along those lines that you're never going to use again. That really messed me up. I had to take that to my sponsor and we had to work through that. I'd like to expand on that maybe a little bit later in this podcast. For the purposes of the responses that you've gotten, and I'm guessing this is on the Facebook page where these have come up. Is that correct?
In different Facebook groups, we've gotten things like, I'm the strong one, so even though my husband or fiance has been sober for 11 months, I still worry it's that he's going to go back to using. It's kind of, is the other shoe going to drop? This feeling of anxiousness around sobriety. Can we maintain sobriety? Is this something that's just kind of like a honeymoon period? What does that look like and how does that feel? And folks who keep asking the person who's getting sober, are you going to stay sober? Are you going to stay sober? I think it makes everybody anxious.
As I read through one of these blurbs that I see here that you were commenting on, there's a concern that one of these fine ladies might do something to cause her significant other to go out or to stop being sober. And that's another interesting issue that we should be able to touch on here today too.
One of the things we want to start with is we have to take everything one day at a time. And that's one of the things that Jerry is really good at reminding me about, is that God has only granted us one day. And I have a tendency to look really forward and to think, well, if this doesn't happen like this or that doesn't happen like that, all could be lost.
Yeah, I am pretty good at that. And, as well as many other things. And my humility is pretty good, too. It's pretty high level of humility, I think. I'm just kidding. I like to believe that I focus on one day at a time. The reason is because nothing screws with my sobriety more than the idea that I have to be sober for the rest of my life. That is the number one way to help sabotage my sobriety, is if I lose sight of the reality that I don't know what tomorrow holds. I only have to be sober for today. And if I can keep my focus on that, it makes serenity in the day attainable.
If any of you have a rebellious streak, just tell yourself you have to do something for the rest of your life and watch how you're not going to do it. And that's kind of where I hang out, is if you're going to tell me that I have to, or I must, or I need to do this for the rest of my life, then I get really, really frustrated and I probably will find a way to sabotage myself, which is kind of what I was doing as Jerry was getting sober and I was learning about my own emotional sobriety. Was I wanted somebody to keep telling me it was going to be okay. And Jerry very wisely said, look, I can't promise you forever. I can promise that today I'm going to work on being sober, and tomorrow I will work on being sober. But what we have is today. Or it went
That's
something.
awesome.
It went something like
you make it
that.
sound like I'm so smart, because in reality, what this was like is, all right, how am I going to put this together now? How can I assure her that I'm going to be sober for the rest of my life? And that's in reality what was going on. I need to be able to come up with like a business plan here, or some kind of a model outlining sobriety forecasted over the next 27 years of my life. And that honestly was what I was trying to do. However, with work with spiritual advisors and a sponsor, I was reminded that, that Tanya's just crazy, and that's an insane thing to ask. And I was crazy for trying to come up with the answer that would satisfy that request.
And it really, let me jump in. It really is crazy for me to look at him and say, I need you to promise for forever you are always going to be this way. Because we've been married for 15 years. Our marriage has changed significantly, probably 3 to 4 times. I mean, with the babies coming along, it changed significantly. With building a house, it changed significantly. With moving the whole family, it changed significantly.
Chickens.
With chickens, that's a whole nother story of 400 chickens. With sobriety, it changed significantly. So I love the Jerry that I met in 2001. He was a neat guy, but I don't want to be with that particular guy forever, because he changes and matures and learns new things about himself, and we do different things. So it's kind of like looking at your man and saying, okay, I need you to promise that you will always
weigh 165 pounds.
Right, weigh 165 pounds. Things happen and they change. Or that you will always make sure that every day you are always home by 8 p.m. at night. That's just, in our world, absolutely impossible. Yes, I think Jerry expects to be sober. I expect to be emotionally sober. Relapse does happen. Do you want to talk about that just a little bit?
Yeah. Do you want to be more specific, or are you looking for something
We're
specific?
just gonna touch on that because we can do a whole episode on that. We have experienced couples who relapse has happened to them. If the person is working their program, if the spouse is working their program, they can often bounce back very quickly. It's not the end of the world. And that's where I think a lot of these comments go is, if it happens, I'm sure it's going to be the end of the world and my life is going to end and we're not going to be able to do anything and the whole thing will be for naught. As the older I get, the more people I watch go through this, it's not true. All things can be rebuilt. All things can change. We're worrying about a finite possibility that doesn't have to be seen as finite.
Yeah, in my experience in recovery, most people relapse. Usually, within the first 7 years. I would say that in my experience, if they've made it that far, they tend to find sobriety again pretty quickly, or clean time, and struggle through it. And it's a lot of work. It's using, again, whether it be tobacco or alcohol or any mind altering drug. It's easy to get used to, and it's hard to get rid of again. However, the tools that you've learned in sobriety, and they don't go away. You can't unlearn those things, and they kind of are like a constant reminder. I don't know. It's almost like if you're trying to remove a piece from your wall, and you can see that there's 4 screws holding it in, and you continue to bang on it with a hammer, knowing that if you bang on it long enough, it'll come free. However, at some point you realize, if I had just grabbed the screwdriver that I have in my tool bag and undone it, I'd have been there that much longer ago. And that's how sobriety is when you're in relapse, is you constantly know you have the tools to go back to healthy again. And it's just a matter of putting away your pride and grabbing it, and getting back to the hard work of being well. It's not complicated, but it's not easy.
Well, and I think we're kind of back to an episode that we really need to do on boundaries of, oftentimes the forward thinkers, the future thinkers, the people who don't live in the present, which is myself, will go, okay, if he does this, then I need to have a boundary ready to go. No, you don't. You need to be in the moment and establish what you need to establish at that time. So you don't need to, I think those of us who have been in caretaking positions of children or kind of the life of the household look at it and say, well, I need to have my ducks in line just in case that happens. No, You don't. You can do what you need to do when it happens. If you spend all this time in the forward thinking spiral, then you're not really living your life for today. And I can tell you that often what you think will happen is not what's going to happen. It's going to be something totally different. It's going to blindside you completely. You can read about that in our story. We never would have thought it happened the way that God made it move. There's no way for me to be prepared for that. The only thing that I think you can do to prepare is make sure you're doing really good self-care. Because if something is to happen, and that's anything, if somebody has an accident or a child gets sick, the car breaks down, if you are doing self-care, if you are taking care of yourself, sleeping well, eating well, getting your exercise, all those types of things, you are better able to handle any situation, not just a relapse or this worry about losing sobriety, which is really the same thing.
All right, let's touch on some of these specifics. So, Tanya spoke with somebody digitally, and that person was talking about how their biggest fear is that their fiance would relapse, that he'd been sober for just about 2 years, and that everything would seem to be going well. That if there was to be a relapse, that person would feel at fault for that to happen. And I think that's probably pretty natural, as an addict. If somebody else has a misstep, I'm the first one to be like, well, better them than me. Sobriety, in my understanding of program, we look at this as a very selfish thing where we, this is about me and me being well. If for a moment I started under the auspice that I was doing this to save my marriage or to be a better father, odds were I wasn't going to be able to pull it off. And if I did pull it off, that I wasn't going to have any happiness, any freedom, or any real joy in my life anyway. Because this has to be about me. And people say, I remember in early sobriety, people would say, oh, what a righteous and noble thing, particularly people who had no idea or never really dealt with addiction in their life. And they'd be like, oh, this is so great that you did this for your children. And I was the first to say, whoa, whoa, whoa. There was nothing righteous or noble about the choice that I made. The reason I chose to go sober was because I didn't want to end up dead or worse. And by worse, I mean, in jail or in an institution or something like that, or in some kind of forced recovery program. That was worse to me than death. With that being said, it was a fear-based decision. Yeah, was it in the best in the long run? Sure, but that's the reality. Is this was a selfish choice that I made. You make the choice to live over the choice to die, and when you get to that level, that bottom, a lot of times it is an easy choice. I shouldn't say it's an easy choice. I should not say it's an easy choice because the choice was heck. And really, the easy choice would have been death or to allow somebody else to make choices for me. But this was me grabbing the reins and saying, I'm going to do this. But let's be clear. I did it for me. So when I hear things, and I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to take a risk here by saying this because I have no doubt that I'm going to hurt some feelings. But when I hear things like, if this person relapses, I'll be at fault, that's kind of the equivalent of taking credit for the sobriety and the clean time too. So if you can take credit for the fall, then it's almost like you're taking credit for the clean time. And neither one of those are your they're not your credit and they're not your fault.
So let me jump in here. One of the things that I had to come to terms with was one of the reasons why I picked Jerry is I needed somebody to save. I needed somebody to rescue so I could feel good about myself. I didn't realize that at the time. He was a handsome man with a motorcycle and lots of fun.
Was?
Is a handsome man. We now have dirt bikes instead of motorcycles for the kids in us. But I was looking for somebody who was somewhat manageable and I could save and I could be the hero. And if I'm the hero, I fulfill a role. The question is, if I'm the saver and the person no longer needs saving, Am I still interested in that person? Is that still somebody I'm attracted to? Because I had a role to play. And so, as sobriety, this is why we're doing the Sober on Purpose podcast, which we're not talking about really about getting sober. We're talking about the struggles after sobriety. If I found fulfillment, if I found my life purpose in saving somebody, then I need to keep them sick. I need to keep them struggling. I need to keep them working in and out of relapse because it fulfills my role in the relationship. Now, that is super twisted when you actually say it out loud. But there are a lot of us out there that if we don't have somebody that we're trying to fix, then we don't know what to do with ourselves. And that's where our own emotional sobriety comes in, of dealing with why we're scared to look at ourselves and deal with our anger, our frustration, our depression, whatever it is that keeps you looking to the outside to clean up the mess for somebody else rather than to clean it up inside yourself. And so I learned early on that houses are projects, not men. Men are divine creatures that they report back to God, not to you. They are accountable and responsible to God, not to you, on how they run and manage their life.
I think it's great. I think this is good stuff, and I feel like we could really dig into this a little deeper, but I do believe we have it covered. I believe we've met all the criteria of this one. I mean, we could get real nuanced about it.
Well, let's talk just a little bit more about giving the other person, whoever it is, the dignity to make their own choices, because that was part of it. I've heard it a lot, if he just loved me, or if he cared about our kids, or if he cared about our marriage, or if she did, we've seen it the other way, then they would get sober. And I'm sorry, it's not about that. It really is about their own hurts, habits, and hangups that's causing that issue, not about if they really loved. They want to really love most of the time. It's a matter of what's going on inside of them.
Yeah, relationship between husband and wife has to be as equal footing as possible. Clearly, roles, sometimes the woman takes the decision maker role primarily, and sometimes the man does. But in a healthy marriage, there has to be balance. In an alcoholic or an addict relationship, a lot of times there isn't balance. Although everybody's a willing participant in the imbalance in power, it's not healthy.
And I think we need to speak to that if you are in a relationship with somebody who is using, you are a willing participant. You have an investment in there. You're choosing to do that. And that's back to my conversation about being the saver. It's the best way I know to describe it, that you are getting something from continuing to participate in this relationship, whether it's financially, whether you have kids, whether it's just the relationship itself. That's where I keep coming back to self-care, that everybody needs to look at what they are getting, even from a highly dysfunctional relationship. Why are you choosing to be here, and what do you see as important? In these questions, we're looking at a lot of people who feel they're responsible for somebody else. If that person is not a child, you are not responsible for them.
Yep, it's true.
What we're kind of speaking to is the 3 C's. You didn't cause it, you can't control it, and you can't cure it. It is up to that person. Jerry has said to me over and over, there is no way that I can take credit for his sobriety, nor can he take credit for all the hard work I've done for my emotional sobriety and showing up at meetings and dealing with my depression and going to therapists and all those things that I had to do to be ready to accept another full adult in my life and in my marriage, because I was trying to do marriage by myself.
Yeah, it's all very true. And I think it's really sided from the position of the person who doesn't struggle with chemical dependency, and that's fine. I'm trying to weigh in where I can to give a full perspective of the situation. However, I think Tanya's best suited to speak to the way to be well.
Well, what would you say? What could these women ask their partners to say to them that wouldn't be conflicting with their partners working on sobriety? What would be something they could say that wouldn't What would you have been willing to say to me when I said, look, I'm really worried that you're going to use again?
What would I be willing to say to you? Well, I'm I'm working my my program, and I'm doing the things that I need to do to be well today so that I don't have this obsession to drink or to use. I wish I had it in me to be able to say something or do something which gave you the satisfaction that it was all going to be well, but I don't. I would have felt comfortable saying all those. It's precarious because you don't want to be confrontational or condescending.
But what could I come to you and say, look, I'm really feeling worried about this. How could I phrase that you could hear it and give me comfort instead of me picking a fight?
Yeah, I think you just did. You just kind of reverse. You just did it right there, but you just reverse the statement and you say, "Boy, I wish you had the ability to give me some kind of assurance that we were going to never have to go through that again, but I realize that that's an unrealistic expectation, and honestly, it doesn't help anything anyway. I'm just glad that we have today to be well together. Can we be thankful together for this and maybe pray about it, maybe hold hands, maybe snuggle, maybe just enjoy the moment, and honestly just embrace that moment, because that's all it is. It's just a whole bunch of little life's moments, and the good ones, we need to hang on to those. We need to store those away. We need to enjoy them, and it's certainly possible to sabotage those little good times with the potential that something may go wrong down the line.
Yeah, and it really, Jerry and I do most of the time a practice of praying together in the morning, and he leaves at a crazy early hour, and it's super quick. And that really helps. That's a good sustainable piece. If you're not somebody who prays, then you might just say a little blessing over each other and bless each other's day, or some comforting words that say, "Hey, I'm here. Call me later on today," or something of that nature. But one of the things that we can say is that it is so important that you be somewhat selfish, that you work your part of the program on your side of the street, and that you let your partner have the dignity to work their part of the program on that side of the street.
Yeah, I do want to just expand just a touch here, because I don't really know, but my guess is if it makes sense for the addict to say, "Hey, I need to go take care of myself. I'm going to go to this program. I'm going to go spend some time communicating with other people who suffer like this. Helps me feel like I'm not the only one, and that there is hope. And here's what happens if I don't, because I'm going to get to see people who relapse. I'm going to get to see people who make it. I'm going to get to see, I'm going to see the full picture." And it helps me to realize, number one, that I'm not alone. And number two, that there are consequences to doing things wrong. And number three, that there is hope for those who do things right. That's what I call self-care, or at least one way to self-care. Another way might be to just have some checkout time emotionally and intellectually, and to do the things that that person needs to do to be well. And that's from the addict side. I would imagine that from the normal person side, the same thing is going to be required. In other words,
I get to be the normal person?
sure, absolutely.
I think the thing that's required from the people who are trying to save or rescue the addict is that you go take care of yourself, that you let go of that you do things that refuel your engines, that you do things that make you feel comfortable and in control of your own life. You say, "Hey, God's got this. If I wanted to be God, I would have to save the whole world." And that's just, it's ridiculous and it's overwhelming. So again, you can't cure it, you can't control it, and you didn't cause it. Yeah. So that lets you off the hook to go, look, like Jerry did in the podcast this week, I'm doing the best I can. You may need to get solace from someone else. Like Jerry said, it's good for him to go and be with people who have experienced addiction and lived through it and work through all those pieces. It's very good for me to go and be with people who have dealt with their anger, their depression, their frustration over trying to save people who did not want to be saved, and to spend time with people who have experienced all that. That's another reason why we're doing the Sober on Purpose podcast, because we had a lot of married couples who said, "Hey, we've been there. We know what you're talking about." So we look forward to seeing you. Make sure that you check us out on Facebook, facebook.com/sober on purpose. That's our new Facebook group. We'd love to talk about this some more in there. Any more words of wisdom and dignity?
No, it's good. It's good stuff.
Hey, we really want to thank you for listening to the Sober on Purpose podcast. And we're recording this during the holiday season, which can be super stressful, lots of family, lots of expectations. And so we've started the Sober on Purpose Facebook group, which you can find either in the show notes on our page or go to facebook.com/sober on purpose. As we are looking at the subject of relapse or staying sober or the fear around relapse, what would you say for self-care?
Self-care, to do what you need to do to get good night's sleep. Do what you need to do to be comfortable in your own skin. Maybe that means making sure you have some alone time a couple times a week at the very least. It's hard to say. It differs between people. Like I'm really right now struggling because I need to get out and go work on the suspension on my dirt bike, and it's killing me, and it eats away at my soul with that suspension off of that, and that's going to be recovery.
A little dirt bike addiction there going.
For me. That's how I find comfort, and that's how I find serenity at this stage in my life. I got to get out there. You know what I mean? I got to do it. And
so anyway, we're wrapping up this podcast saying, hey, get to a meeting, but the only person you truly have control over is you. And the healthier you can be, the healthier everybody else around you will be. We hope to see you next week. We know we'll see you next week. Join us in the Facebook group at facebook.com/sober on purpose.
And bring your friends.
That's right. Bring your friends and we'll talk some more about dirt bikes.
Right. Recovery. Dirt bikes.